Today, we're talking about your business's growth strategy, and I'm going to connect it to the three things most founders don't look at closely enough: their sales engine, their pipeline engine, and their numbers. My definition of a growth strategy is very simple. It's your ability to make the right decisions about where to put your time, your money, and your resources to grow your business. So in business, you've got unlimited options, but you've got a limited amount of time, money, and resources. So your business's growth strategy is deciding what gets your focus and what gets added to your not to-do list. You see, most businesses, they're not short of ideas. We are all privy to a bit of shiny object syndrome. But in business, where your shortfalls come is your level of focus and the gap between what we said we do and what we're actually spending money on is where most growth stalls within companies. So that's what this episode is going to unpack. So let's delve into it. Here's how I think about it. Your growth strategy, it's definitely not a deck, although you can put it in a deck. It's not a plan that you wrote before an offsite with all your leadership team or your investors. Your growth strategy is understanding what's going to give you most leverage. Leverage is the key word because you need to define where there is leverage in your market and tie that back to how much time, money, and resources you can allocate to those activities that are going to move the needle forward, that are going to generate the pipeline. You know, I always say a business lives and dies based on its pipeline. All right. So, you know, for you, you can't sell to nobody. You need pipeline first. And of course, you need a fantastic sales team. But this is what this story is going to highlight, and I hope it kind of resonates with some of the listeners today. So you need to observe your P&L. It's where the money actually goes, because money definitely doesn't lie. You need to say, like, we listen to a lot of founders, and they say to us on calls, our priority is inbound leads. That's all we want. But then when we dig into the numbers of how much they're spending on growth, 80% of their budget is going towards trade shows, and they're going towards a sales team, and they're not really focusing on what they're telling us. So they're spending a lot of money on, you know, a really expensive sales director and a marketing director, but they're more thinkers. They're not necessarily doers. So words don't really matter. Spend matters. And you need to understand what are the activities you're spending on, and have you got feedback loops to improve this going forward, so that you don't spend 200 grand on a sales director and a marketing director, but no activity actually gets done. Let me give you an actual practical example. So we worked with a B2B SaaS company last year. And before they reached out to us, they had raised a round of funding, and their growth strategy was really simple: scale revenue as fast as they possibly can. So what did they do? They hired a sales team. So they hired a sales manager, and that sales manager then went and hired 5 sales reps, okay, expensive ones. So senior closers on good base salaries plus commission. And it sounds like a growth move, right? That you would hire a sales team. Except here's what they didn't do. They didn't put a single euro into generating pipeline for those 5 sales reps. So to be fair to the sales manager, he was coming in with his prior experience. He'd worked in a fairly large SaaS company beforehand, which had good systems, good infrastructure, steady pipeline. So what he knew best was to hire sales reps and source that talent. But coming into this business, obviously a very different scenario in terms of where they deployed time, money, and resources. But they had no outbound program, no inbound engine, no content, no brand spend. But they had 5 sales reps sitting at desks with empty calendars waiting for the phone to ring. So what happened? The sales manager started encouraging them to source their own leads. They were doing cold LinkedIn messages, personal networking, calling old contacts, attending events. They even set up a booth at one of their own events. And some of them were decent at prospecting, but most weren't. Let's say 2 out of the 5. And that's not what you hired senior closers to do. You're not paying someone $100,000 a year to prospect on LinkedIn. That's the most expensive lead gen program in the world. So 3 months in, 2 out of the 6 on the team had already quit. Pipeline was continuing to run thin, and the morale was shot at this point. The CEO was panicking because the burn rate had gone through the roof with nothing to really show for it. And the growth strategy said scale revenue. So the spending said hire salespeople, but hiring salespeople isn't your holistic growth strategy. It's one piece of a growth strategy, but without the pipeline investment to feed them, it's just a cost. And that's the thing. The CEO genuinely believed that he was investing in growth, but they were writing, very large salary checks every month, but the checks were going to the wrong place. The P&L told the real story. All the money was on closing and nothing was on generating pipeline and opportunities. So the first thing, I tell any founder is observe your P&L. Look at the top 5 line items by spend and ask yourself, are these funding the way you're trying to grow? Or are they funding the way maybe the business used to grow? Because in most businesses, a big chunk of the budget is going to things nobody ever questioned. They just carried over from the previous year, or maybe even just budget was misallocated. And last year's priorities might have nothing to do with where you need to go to next. We always say what got you from A to B probably isn't going to get you to C in business. You need to adapt and change and think, where are the biggest constraints in the business? Where's the focus areas? Where are we going to move the needle forward? And that's the foundation. So as I said, I want to break this into 3 parts. You've got sales, you've got pipeline, you've got financial intelligence. So you need to centralize those, bring them into a sort of a RevOps structure. What happens in a lot of scaling B2B businesses is they break into silos. Sales start blaming marketing for poor leads, marketing blames sales for not closing, finance aren't seeing the numbers go up, and the CEO or the owners of the business are just saying, stop playing the blame game, stop pointing fingers, we need to create a level of alignment here. And, these have to work together. In most businesses, they don't, So let's start with pipeline. I'm deliberately not saying marketing here because pipeline is bigger than just marketing. Most founders hear pipeline and they think inbound leads. That's one slice, but pipeline is every route you have for getting a qualified conversation in front of someone who can close. And if you're only thinking about it as a marketing function, you're definitely missing out. So let me break down how we think of growing pipeline. You've got outbound is going to your market and reaching out to them. So your team identifying the right companies, the right people, reaching out to them directly. Account-based marketing, cold email, cold calling, LinkedIn, whatever the channel. A lot of people say this doesn't work. They're wrong. I can guarantee you all of the largest SaaS and B2B companies in the world have an outbound function. They have a business development team, a market development team, and they have grown significantly from reaching out and knocking on doors. It is an absolute fact. There's no denying that fact. And the point is, you're choosing to talk to who you want to go after. You're not waiting for them. You're hunting them. Now, you have to do it in the right way. The reason why people say it doesn't work is because they don't know how to get it to work. They don't actually know what works. For most businesses, especially when you're trying to move up market or break into a new segment, outbound is where the fastest pipeline will come into. It's definitely not glamorous, but it's controllable. You can turn it up, you can turn it down. You know exactly where you're going after it. Who you're targeting, your total addressable market. And when it works, the deal quality is usually high value because you picked the prospect. They didn't just stumble across your website. Inbound is obviously coming to you, so that can be content, SEO, paid ads, social ads, driving that back to your website and then through your funnel where someone can book in for a discovery call. And this is the stuff that most people think of when they think of marketing, and it's important, but inbound does take time to go through feedback loops and to build this. It's a little bit harder to control, but it is very fruitful and a faster sales cycle than outbound, because they typically have their credit cards out. They're ready to engage and purchase from you. Whether you're a product or a service or whatever the case may be, someone's actively searching you or they have come across you on Google. But typically they're going to Google or they're going to ChatGPT nowadays to find a solution to their problem. Think backwards on FAQ questions, and that is inbound. With intention. There's obviously impulse when it comes to inbound as well. Like you could run a social advertisement on LinkedIn and someone, you might catch someone's attention and drive them back that way as well. So there's sort of two sides to that. But if pipeline is thin right now and your only plan is we're investing in content and lead magnets, well, that's not a pipeline plan. That's sort of a 12-month brand bet, and it's definitely something you should have, but you need to start solving today's problem. So running like a search campaign on Google would probably have higher intent. Okay, so there might be, because they're more looking for a solution to their problem. It goes back to what I said. How many of you have maybe gone away on holidays and you're looking for restaurants in your area? Again, you're going to go to Google, you're going to type that in, restaurants near me. It's the same effect with when someone's searching for a service or a product. And again, this is very factual information. It's guaranteed that there's a huge amount of your ideal customer searching for the services or the products that you offer. You need to show up on the channels that they are looking for you. Nearbound is one of the most ignored, I would say, forming partnerships. And it might be I think the highest leverage pipeline in B2B. Nearbound is a pipeline that comes through your existing relationships or ecosystem, strategic partnerships, agency partnerships, technology partnerships, advisors, investors. Even your existing customers are a form of how you can generate pipeline through Nearbound. So these are warm introductions into accounts that already trust the person who referred you. And the conversion rates are usually the best of any channel because you're starting from zero. So someone has already vouched for you, and yet most businesses have no structure around Nearbound as an overall strategy. It's just hoping that someone refers us, and that's not a system. That's sort of wishful thinking. And then there's brand. Brand isn't, a pipeline channel per se in some way. It's the thing that makes all of these other channels, so outbound, inbound, Nearbound, which we call an all-bound strategy. It's what brings them all together. When your outbound lands in someone's inbox and they've already heard of you, or their reply rate is naturally going to be different, they'll typically go to your website and have a look at your case studies, or they'll look at your process, your team. They'll want to understand, what value you can bring to them. So that's what brand is. It sits on a couple of different pillars, and we'll speak about that in another podcast. But when a Nearbound partner sort of refers you and the prospect already knows your name, the sales cycle is a hell of a lot shorter. So brand is the multiplier. It doesn't generate pipeline on its own, but it makes every other source more effective. And the mistake is treating brand as either the whole strategy or ignoring it completely. It's neither. It's the engine oil is what I would say. So it's really important that you're focusing in on brand. And here's a question that I typically ask is like, how many of those channels are actually active in your business right now? If you were to look at outbound, inbound, and nearbound for generating pipeline, because that's a telltale sign. Like we are always trying to work backwards as to what is it costing your business to get a lead into the pipeline and what are your close rates. Those are the two kind of North Star metrics that we're working with all of our clients initially to really focus in on first. Because once we know how much it costs to get a lead into the pipeline and our close rates on those leads, we can scale the business. But until we have those numbers, and of course they're gonna fluctuate, but until we have those numbers, it's very, very hard to scale. So in all of our clients' businesses, we know exactly what it's costing to get an inbound, an outbound, and a nearbound lead into their pipeline, and what are their close rates. So yeah, like a close friend of mine, he also runs a digital agency, 30 people, does about 4 million a year in turnover. And he's been stuck at that number for 18 months. And when I asked him how pipeline enters his business, the answer was referrals, word of mouth, and events. So every single client came from someone they already knew. And that is amazing. Like, it's incredible to have a business that has grown from word of mouth and referrals. You're clearly incredibly good at what you do, but it is still unpredictable because there's not much predictability with someone referring you work, whereas there is a level of predictability with putting outbound, nearbound, and inbound structure in place. So again, it's not a growth strategy to say I get my work from referrals and word of mouth. I think that's a dependency, and dependencies can break. Of course, there's a lot of fantastic businesses out there that have grown this way, but we call this podcast the growth seat for a reason. We're working with businesses who want to aggressively grow to the next stage and want to prove to investors that they can 100x. That's really why we created this, because a lot of our clients, they have received investment and they are under pressure to 100x their business. No one's investing in a company if they don't want to 100x it. So there's pressure from investors, whether that's private equity, whether that is private investors, whatever the case may be. But the objective of this podcast is to facilitate and help people who are in that position to grow in a more measurable way, to think about this from a different perspective. So before I move on, you need to define what a qualified opportunity actually looks like for your business. Not a lead, not a name on a list, a real opportunity. So someone who has the problem you solve and can afford to pay for it and has authority to say yes and has a reason to act now. And write those definitions down when they come into the pipeline and they've booked in for a 45-minute discovery call. That's what we see as a lead. So make sure everyone, who touches your pipeline, whether that be outbound, inbound, nearbound, that your team agrees on what that is, and that sales also signs off on this, so you can create that level of alignment. And then measure everything from there. So we measure everything in pre-sale, in-sale, and post-sale. We want to measure those different stages, because if different channels are working off different definitions of what good looks like, you've got activity, but then there's going to be this lack of alignment, and that's really expensive. So finally, I just want to talk about numbers. This is the part that ties this all together, and what most founders skip is, when we say financial intelligence, I don't mean being good at accounts. I mean knowing the handful of numbers that tell you whether your growth engine is working or just making noise. And there's 4 that matter most. So number 1, your blended cost to acquire a customer. So the real number, not the one that marketing reports. So everything, the ad spend, the sales team's time if they're doing outbound, the demos, the travel, the events, all of it divided by customers you actually won. So most businesses massively undercount this. I worked with a software company that thought their acquisition cost was about €800. Marketing dashboard said so. So it was kind of, computer says this. When we added up the real picture, between their biz dev team, spending weeks prospecting, and then sales teams on each deal, travel to client site. The actual number was closer to around 4,000, so 5 times what they had actually thought. And they'd been making every hiring decision and every channel decision based on the wrong number for 2 years. So that's not a small error. That's, a completely different business. Number 2 is the lifetime value versus the acquisition cost. So is a customer worth more than what you spend to get them? If the answer is barely or no, well then you're definitely not growing. You're buying revenue and you're going to run out of road very quickly on that. So that's another one to track. Number 3 is contribution margin by product or service line. So not your overall margin, the margin on each thing that you sell after its direct costs. So this tells you which parts of the business are funding your growth and which parts are quietly draining it. So I've seen businesses where the flagship product, the one on the homepage, the one the CEO is most proud of, was the lowest margin that they've ever sold in terms of a product. And the side service nobody sort of talked about was, I suppose, taking over in terms of the growth potential that it had. So you can't make good growth decisions if you don't know where the profit actually sits. And then number 4 is revenue per employee. If this number is going up or staying flat as you grow, the engine is working. If it's going down, you're adding headcount faster than you're adding value. And that's a structural problem. So you don't fix it by telling people to work harder. You fix it by figuring out why your overall machine isn't converting people into revenue. So these are like 4 simple numbers. Obviously, there's plenty more numbers to track. These are just ones that come up quite regularly in our conversations. I think it's important to know them because once you do, you stop arguing about opinions and you start making more decisions on evidence, and evidence-based decisions are a lot faster, they're a lot cheaper, and usually they're better to create alignment and to move the needle forward with the business. So one more thing, the tension between short-term and long-term. So every growing business is trying to do 2 things: hit the number this quarter and invest in the thing that creates next year's number. So these 2 are fighting over the same budget every single month. And here's what usually happens. Pipeline is light in Q2, so marketing pulls money from content program and throws it into paid ads. Big prospect wants, something custom. So you bring in 2 engineers, they come off, your product roadmap to focus on this big client. Then you've got Q3s looking a bit tight, so you freeze the new hire that you're about to hire. Each one starts to make sense on its own, but when you stack this up over 6 to 9 months, you've silently abandoned your growth strategy without ever making a decision to do so, because these were all little quick decisions, but overall it's drifted the overall focus. So the short term ate the long term, bite by bite, and nobody really noticed. So the fix here is quite simple. Split your resources into 2 pots. You've got pot 1, run the business, keep the current engine going, and then pot 2, build the business. So working in the business, working on the business. The investments that won't pay off this quarter, but compound over the next 12 months. And pot 2 gets a floor, a minimum that doesn't get raided when things get tight, because every time the short term borrows from the long term, it never pays it back. I've seen it enough times to be pretty certain on this. So I'm not anti-intuition, but founder gut feel is definitely something we've seen a lot, where you come up with, an assumption on something. You've built pattern recognition for years of being close to the work, but no dashboard gives you that. But as a business gets bigger, the gap between what your gut says and what's actually true gets a hell of a lot wider. So not because your instinct is bad, but because the business outgrows the scale that your instincts were built for. So what felt right at a million euros turnover doesn't hold at 5 million euros. So financial intelligence doesn't replace your gut. It keeps it honest and either says, yeah, you're right, here's the proof, or it says, hold on, the numbers are telling a different story. But either way, you make a better decision. And that's what the whole session that you need to have in terms when you're sitting down with that leadership team is to build towards that. Not more data, not more dashboards, but sharper thinking, the ability to grow a business with a lot more clarity instead of guesswork. So, yeah, I hope this episode was helpful. We unpacked quite a lot. But thanks for listening. As I said, I'm Rory Kieran, and this is The Growth Seat. I'll see you in the next episode.